The so-called conclave of 133 Catholic cardinals, whose sole task is to select a new pope, has been unsuccessful in its first vote. The news was signalled by black smoke billowing from the chimney of the Vatican's Sistine Chapel. The ballot will now be repeated on Thursday and perhaps again and again until a two-thirds majority is reached on a single name. That man will succeed the late Pope Francis and lead the 1.5 billion members of the Catholic Church. DW's Jack Parrock was outside the Vatican when the chimney started smoking.
Black smoke coming out of the chimney above the Sistine Chapel, which means that the thousands of people that have been stood in and around St. Peter's Square are now heading off home. They know that a new pope will not be coming out on the balcony tonight. What it means is that of the 133 electors in the conclave, two-thirds of them didn't manage to reach that threshold of two-thirds voting for one particular candidate. That's what needs to happen in order for a pope to be selected. Now, it broadly wasn't expected that that would happen in this first vote. It's very rare for that to happen. And what it means is that the cardinals will stay sequestered. They will leave the Sistine Chapel, they will head back to their lodgings, and they will return on Thursday to hold 4 votes, potentially up to 4 votes, to try and select a pope again. They will keep going until that two-thirds margin has been hit and we get then white smoke, not the black smoke like we're seeing coming out of the chimney now. So 4 votes potentially on Thursday. The people of Rome and the 1.4 billion Catholics of the world will continue their wait to find out who the next pope's going to be.
Well, Meghan J. Clarke is a professor of theology and religious studies at St. John's, a Catholic university in New York City. Welcome to DW News. When it comes to electing a new pope, what does the Church need now?
Well, thank you for having me, Ben. It's my pleasure to be with you tonight. I think when you look around the world, the cardinals that are in the conclave have to determine who best can lead 1.5 billion Catholics, but also be a voice for peace and for justice and all of those kind of moral issues at the same time, speak not only to the church, but to the wider world. So I suspect they're looking for someone deeply committed to the gospel, someone who is who's very holy, but also someone who can communicate. Mm-hmm.
So another pope for the people, but also one who's going to be political, is that what you're saying?
I don't think it's a matter of politics. I think if we look around the Pope, because the Holy See, because the Vatican City is a city-state, it operates in a space where it has a global voice. And so it is able to kind of bring people in conflict or politicians to a table that isn't necessarily political. Mm-hmm. And there aren't many spaces where people who are in deep disagreements will come together and sit side by side without politics being the center of it. Just look at Pope Francis's funeral.
You've said that in contrast to previous conclaves, that the diverse global nature of this one is an important point. Why is that?
So 100 years ago, in 1922, there were only Europeans who were voting on the next pope. Right now in Rome, there are cardinals from 71 countries. The conclave that elected Francis only had 43. If we look at where those 1.5 billion Catholics are, they're growing in the global south. It is a global church. And this is really the first conclave that really has that sense of global diversity in the electors and not just power centers or not just huge population centers. We have a cardinal from South Sudan, a cardinal from Myanmar, cardinals from places where Catholics are the minority or even Christians are the minority. That's never really happened before.
But what does this global factor actually mean? Could it mean that we get a more conservative pope this time round? I mean, can you get more progressive than what we just had in Pope Francis?
I think what what we will see is that the conversations that they've had over the past 10 days are really about learning about the reality of the church in every corner of the world and what it means, the challenges facing Catholics in a place like Myanmar or South Sudan or Kenya or El Salvador or Germany or the United States. They're not the same. And so one of the things that I think we can expect is that the questions and the kind of the lens or the flavor that of wherever the next pope comes from will certainly influence, those experiences will influence the kind of pope that he is. I think at the same time, we tend in the United States, at least, to have these political images of conservative and progressive. And everyone who's in that room, all of the kind of possibilities for the next pope, one thing that is certain is they're going to be someone who talks a lot about peace. They're going to be someone who talks about the dignity of migrants and of the importance of care for the climate and addressing the climate crisis, because those are just deep issues that come out of the gospel for the 21st century.
A peace pope would definitely be progressive enough for me and something very good. Meghan J. Clarke from St. John's University in New York City. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
A centuries-old ritual is taking place in the Vatican as we speak, the conclave to elect a new pope, a process that remains shrouded in secrecy. While we know some facts about how the leader of the world's 1.4 billion Roman Catholics is chosen, much of what transpires in the Sistine Chapel, that remains a great mystery. With the closing of the doors, the cardinals who will pick the next pontiff have been locked up until they've made their decision. Now, there is no communication with the outside world apart from the smoke that emerges from the specially installed chimney on the roof of the Sistine Chapel. Today it was black, signaling that the first vote failed to reach the 2/3 majority required to elect a new pope. The conclave is the biggest and most geographically diverse ever. A total of 133 cardinals under the age of 80 are taking part in the vote. A majority of them, 108 to be exact, were appointed by the late Pope Francis. And for the first time, a majority of cardinals come from outside Europe. They will be locked inside the Sistine Chapel and Santa Marta guest house in complete isolation from the outside world until the white smoke emerges, announcing that a new pope has been chosen. Well, let's speak now to someone who knows a lot about the inner workings of the Vatican. Massimo Faggioli is professor of historical theology at Villanova University and author of numerous books on the Catholic Church. It's good to have you with us this evening. I have to ask you, why is the conclave carried out? Why is it carried out in such secrecy?
Because the conclave was invented between the 11th and the 13th century to solve one problem, which was to keep the powerful Roman families of the aristocracy of the city of Rome outside of that moment, because everyone wanted to have one of their own being elected pope, or to make sure that one of their enemies was not elected pope. And so that led to a series of violent events sometimes. And then in the early modern period, you had the rise of modern states and then empires who had an interest in controlling or influencing. So the secrecy is not to help some conspiracies, but just to protect the freedom of the electors.
How does the Vatican stop the cardinals from leaking information about the conclave to the outside world? I mean, I'm thinking about our constant connectivity right now. Everyone has a smartphone, for example. Has that made it more difficult to cordon off the cardinals?
Well, technologically, it's more difficult. You have to make sure that no cardinal has a cell phone, an iPad, something like that. But the first rule is that there's an oath, and there is a serious penalty if a cardinal violates that oath of secrecy during and after the conclave. Now, after conclaves, we know something of what happens, but not the details. So there's an oath, first of all, which is a legal act with legal consequences potentially. And then there are systems to protect, to isolate them, and to make sure that there is no communication with the outside. It's technologically more complicated because now with drones and some satellites, it has become more challenging, yes.
And during the conclave, are the cardinals, are they able or are they allowed to communicate with each other?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They have dinner, lunch together. Pope Francis' autobiography, which was published in January, tells something of the 2013 conclave when someone was trying to jeopardize his candidacy, saying that he was very ill already in 2013. So they talk. That's the most important part. It's informal conversations when some alliances, but also some personal knowledge develops and helps the formation of a consensus.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I also understand that the paper ballots that are used in each round of voting, they are burned immediately after the votes are tallied. But I understand that the cardinals are encouraged to masquerade their own handwriting when they're writing the name of the person they would like to elect to be the next pope. Why is this? Is it to protect the cardinals from each other?
Well, to make sure that the vote of a person about another person is secret also in the eyes of those who read those ballots. So it's a very delicate votation because it's not about a law or a theoretical issue, but it's about a person. Okay? So that's why there has to be more measures to make sure that no one can know how a certain cardinal has voted about his neighbor or someone who's next to him or who's in his same country maybe.
But I want to be clear on this. So during the conclave, when the cardinals, let's say they're having dinner, there will be open discussion, I'm assuming, and that is where you will see the camps build for a certain candidate, if you will. I mean, do we see kind of cheerleading going on, if you will?
Well, it's small table discussions, so in small groups, and there are certain rules. For example, if you are a favorite or you're about to win, it's a good rule I've read that you don't show up in these conversations, that you show up late for dinner, for example, allowing cardinals to talk. Right? So there's some unwritten rules that help some conversations develop in those days.
Yeah, fascinating. And I assume it's not only the cardinals. What about the other staff who are involved in the conclave? I mean, how does the Vatican stop them from leaking information?
Oh, they have a very strict oath of secrecy that they have to take 1 or 2 days before the cardinals take that oath. So that's and they incur in the same very serious canonical penalties if they violate that oath.
I understand what we know about the conclaves is found in archives around Europe, journals, manuscripts that were written by scholars who were cardinals, all of this many centuries ago. I mean, is that true that actually we have a better picture of the conclave in 1400 than we do in the year 2000?
In some sense, yes, because they were also much more political events. And so they were just like an assembly of the United Nations, right? So much more under the microscope of the political key actors back then. And so what's typical of the modern papacy is that it has maintained a certain political relevance, but it's mostly about the election of a pope, of a bishop of Rome. And so that's why certain rules have been adapted to preserve the religious nature of that office more than a temporal, secular kind of office.
Mr. Faggioli, let me ask you before we run out of time, do you think the conclave will ever change? I mean, could we ever see the conclave becoming a more transparent process?
So some things have changed in these last 8 centuries. Some kings, emperors, they had a right to veto. And after 1903, that right doesn't exist anymore. Some things will change. I don't think it will change radically because it has withstood the test of time pretty well in these last 8 centuries. So if it works, don't fix it. That's an ancient rule that applies to the conclave as well.
Yeah, that's right. If it's not broke, you don't need to fix it. That's true. Professor, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights. Fascinating discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.